I want to welcome Mark Lipman, filmmaker of REFUGE. I'm Pat Ferrero, and I was a longtime program director of the Mendocino Film Festival. And in recent years, I've kept my hand in with a sidebar that I call Pat's Picks. And I'm so delighted to welcome Mark and to thank him for the gift that he's given to the Mendocino Film Festival of his film Refuge. Now, Mark is actually known to the festival. He's had two prior films in the festival. One, his very moving film, Father's Day, and a more recent film called States of Grace, which he made with his wife and filmmaking partner, Helen Cohen, and that was a very special, wonderful event at the Mendocino Film Festival. Both films really deal with how one deals with trauma, catastrophe, and just really life-crushing events. And both films really focus on how does one heal. And so, Mark, I wanted to just open up by asking you, do I see a trilogy here where all three films really are about healing, and what your own take and experience of how you came to make Refuge and how it's connected to healing?
Thanks, Pat. First, before I get into all that, let me thank you and Alana and the festival. My experiences in Mendocino have been fabulous. And I mean, festivals have a lot of different masters to serve. And I always felt like you served the filmmakers at a really high level. And I've just had great times there. So thanks. And thanks for having Refuge here. So it's interesting. I didn't think of Refuge as part of a trilogy. And it's interesting that you put it that way. I could see that. It's not obviously about healing. I think it's a restorative film. And it evolved in sort of a really organic way. This is filmed at Gray Lodge, which is a wildlife refuge in Gridley, California, in the Central Valley. And a friend of ours had been going to Gray Lodge for like 20 years to celebrate her birthday, which is in the middle of December, which is sort of the height of the migration season there. And so she invited us to come, and that was my first time there in 2011. And I was just blown away by the place. It's physically gorgeous. There's mountains visible on 3 directions. The Sutter Buttes to the south, the Sierras to the west, and the coastal range to the right. So, and then there's these gorgeous ponds with tens of thousands of migrating birds on them. And there can be fog and mist rising up from the ponds. It's just a gorgeous place. The sound of the birds is amazing. So I was quite smitten right from the get-go. I think really the seed of a project happened in 2016. There was, do you know the sound artist Janet Cardiff? She's a Canadian sound artist.
No, I don't know her. I know Murray Schafer and the World Soundscape. Right. Is it part of that?
No, she's known for these sound installations, and she had a piece called the 40-Part Motet at Fort Mason Center for the Arts in San Francisco. And this is a 16th century motet in 40 parts. Each part is different. It's 8 groups of 5 singers. So there's, and it's about 10 minutes of singing, and it's a gorgeous, gorgeous piece of music. And what Cardiff did was record it with a microphone on each individual singer. And so there were 40 tracks of sound, and then she played them back in an oval of speakers. There were 40 speakers on stands, arranged in a huge oval overlooking the bay at Fort Mason.
Oh, beautiful.
And so each individual voice was coming out of one of these speakers, and you could go up to a speaker and hear the individual, or you could stand in the center and hear the whole effect of this. And it's a magnificent piece of work.
Mm.
And I went several times. Both times there would be people standing there crying. Couples would often be holding each other. It was just an incredibly moving piece.
Mm.
And I started to kind of wonder what a visual analog to that might be.
Mm.
Like what could I create visually that
Mm.
might come anywhere near sort of evoking that kind of response in people?
Mm.
And sort of the experience that I had at Grey Lodge was the closest thing in my own experience that came to that. And
Mm.
so I started to think about what I might do there.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting because the threads that I'm seeing in looking at Refuge is that you're really dealing in interesting ways with the micro macrocosm simultaneously with the three screens. And I love that sometimes you're quite intimate with the camera and other times there are these vast scapes, but also you're condensing time in an interesting way. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about both the editing challenges and the pleasures, because I love the structure that you gave of a day unfolding. It begins at dawn and it ends with the moon coming up. But in fact, that's a juxtaposition of multiple observations over time. And so talk a little bit about just what the editing challenge for you was to move from an installation, which has its own set of problems, to what we're seeing now at the film festival, a 3-screen flat canvas or screen.
Yeah.
I say canvas actually because there's such a painterly quality to your editing. So I'd also like you to just comment on that.
Great. That's a wonderful question. I've made most of my living as an editor. But this was a challenge. I'd never done anything like this before. I'd never had such a large canvas to work with,
Right.
and something divided in this way. And I really didn't know how I was going to move through time. So it was a real challenge to kind of develop a vocabulary for how to do this.
Mm.
There was a moment when I realized that shifting a change in image from one screen, changing the next screen, and then the next screen in a sort of fast rhythm kind of mimicked a dissolve through from one scene to another.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized I could kind of jump doing that. And the overall guiding notion, I guess, in this was for the screen, each cut to move forward in time in some way. Whether, no matter which screen it was on, that it kind of, with the light changing, the brightness changing, it was kind of believable to a viewer that we were kind of moving forward that way. So, and it's interesting, one of the places that I started in the filming, just to go back, I actually bought several Sony action cams at one point. And I had an idea of, and I set them up in an array where I could record 360 degrees. And I thought that I would just record in one place and have that be the thing.
Right.
But that totally didn't work.
Right.
So then it did come to this problem of how do I sort of blend all these different days and lighting conditions and everything else into a single piece that was kind of plausible. So that, yeah.
I noticed that the horizon line is a very major part of your transitions.
Yeah.
And how did you control that?
Well, that wasn't exactly controlled. I shot in 4K. With the techies out there will know what that means, but functionally what it means, since this is in high definition, it meant that I could zoom in a little bit, or actually quite a bit if I needed to, and I could adjust where the horizon line was.
Right.
I'm hoping actually to at some point render this whole thing in 4K, which will make it a little problematic that I've done this, but for this kind of use, it works well.
Yeah.
The other thing that I really wanted to do, the film starts with just sound and no image, and it ends the same way.
Right,
And I
right.
really wanted to start with the sound only, just so people could tune their ears and just be keyed into the sound, because that's so, for 30 seconds, that's all a viewer has to sort of take in is the sound.
Right. Yeah. The other question is really about just the sound, because you're having to compose a acoustic space that exists in time, and yet each screen has its own sound. What were the sound challenges for you to kind of, again, make us present with what we're seeing, but also shape a larger thing through time?
That was a huge challenge as well. And it's wonderful actually to be talking about these things. I haven't had a chance to go into this, and
Yeah.
there were really huge questions as I was editing. What I arrived at is that the surround sound recordings that I made often provide a long bed.
Mm-hmm.
And then the specific sound that was recorded with the moving images will almost function as spot sound on top of the surround. So there are times when there are as many as 7 or 8 tracks of sound that are, and sometimes it's a blending of multiple screens. There's also a question like sort of how abrupt to make scene changes and where to have continuity.
Right.
And there's a couple of places that I would still tweak at this point, which I guess is always the case. You know that a film is never really finished, especially in the digital age.
Right.
But that was a challenge to sort of make it sort of both seamless and specific at the same time.
Mm-hmm. And towards the end, there are these wonderful passages that are truly almost painterly. The first one begins with those white backgrounds, very light backgrounds, and then motion moving through it. That was just a total visual delight to see those almost abstract color feels.
So were you talking, is this with the waves of snow geese? Or
Yes.
which, yeah.
Yeah, towards the end, there are 2 frames that are almost white and a 3rd frame that's dark. And then the whole, all 3 screens move into a very light field with things. And then as you move into dusk, there are these pink and purple sunsets, and they're very large scale, very painterly.
Yeah. That was the thing that it may have been the most surprising to me. I didn't understand that I was going to be creating these compositions
Right.
across 3 screens, and that the way that just the colors related to each other was going to be really significant. I have a little bit of color blindness. I'm a little red-green colorblind. So I never do my own color correction.
Right.
But this kind of thing was sort of broad enough that I actually had a lot of fun playing with that, and there were a lot of iterations of this before I kind of arrived at what you're seeing.
Right. Well, these are all questions about you as the filmmaker editing. What did you have in mind in terms of what you wanted the audience, how you wanted the audience to view this? Because it seems to me you're really giving an audience a whole new possibility to sit with a film. It's a film that can be seen from beginning to end. It's a film that can be watched in small segments. It's a film that can be meditated to. Tell me what you had in your mind for what you thought an audience response would be, what you hoped it would be, and what feedback you're getting as to what it in fact is.
Well, it's interesting. You only learn what it is when it's done, really, and people start responding to it. I think, I mean, really, I was just hoping to let people share the experience that I had at this place. It's, for me, it's a really spiritual place to be. It may be the most spiritual place I've ever been in. It has an incredible pull for me in ways that I don't entirely understand. So I was really looking to share the experience. I mean, most people aren't going to have the opportunity to go there in person, although I'd certainly encourage you to. So I was really wanting to share that experience. And part of that also developed into the notion, it's a very slow-paced piece. The shots are on for a relatively long periods of time, which is also part of my experience of being there. I spend long periods of time looking in different directions at different, and the time, the duration is really important. So I didn't want to be sort of whipsawing people around from shot to shot. I mean, typically a lot of what is common now is these 3 or 4 second shots and very, very fast paced editing. I just didn't want to do that. I wanted to give people the time. In terms of the response, it's been so gratifying. The installation played for 3 weeks at the Museum of Northern California Art in Chico, and I had a little guest book out, and people wrote, and it was, I had really questioned how many people, especially in a museum setting, would sit through a 45-minute piece.
Right.
Because you're there to sort of go through the galleries and move on. And a large majority of the people actually watched the entire thing. So some people came back 2, 3, 4 times to watch. One woman told me it was the most beautiful piece she'd ever seen. So that was just incredibly gratifying. And I'm very curious how the people are going to take this as a film. And I'd love to, actually, I'll put in a plug right here. For people, writing either on Facebook or to me directly, I'd love to hear about your reactions to the piece.
Yeah. Well, that just made me think of one other thing before we wrap. In addition to giving Refuge as a gift to the Mendocino Film Festival, you've also just recently posted on your filmmaker's website a gift, and maybe you'd like to just let our audience know, because it'll be available the window that Refuge will be. And so maybe you want to fill us in on that film.
Great.
And how people can watch it.
Good, thank you. No, this is something completely different. The film is called Arc of Justice. And Helen and I actually have been very involved in making media related to community land trusts and community development, community organizing. And we released Arc of Justice in, I believe, 2000, when was this? 18, I think. Might have been 2017. It's a film about the very first community land trust. And community land trusts are a way of owning land and housing, or the land communally and creating affordable housing. It can be used to, this landholding structure can be used in a variety of ways, but it's most commonly now used for the creation of permanently affordable housing. It developed actually out of the civil rights movement in 1970, and John Lewis was one of the people on the programming group that, not the planning group that developed the model. Arc of Justice is a short film. It's 22 minutes, and it describes the creation of this first community land trust, which was really put forward to help empower Black farmers gain control of land and improve their lives. So in honor of Congressman Lewis's passing, we are making it available at no charge through the end of July. We were able to interview him in his Atlanta office, and just, it was, I mean, everything that you've heard about him was our experience. He was incredibly gracious and extremely humble, and was just a very strong advocate of this whole idea.
So how do people see it? Do they Google the title of the film, or?
It's available through New Day Films, which is the educational distributor for all of my films and I think most of your films as well, right?
That's true.
That's actually how you and I know each other, is
Yeah,
through New Day.
great believers
So,
in collectives and co-ops.
right, right. So Arc of Justice New Day Films will do it. There's actually arcofjusticefilm.com is the film's website. There's a lot of educational materials that accompany the film there. And there's also related films that you can find out about as well.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, Mark, thank you, thank you. Is there any last thing you'd like to say? I just thank you for all of your wonderful filmmaking over the years and for you gifting it, particularly Refuge, to the Mendocino Film Festival, and look forward to having you back here in person. But
wonderful. I can't wait till I can be back in person. But I would just thank you again. I would thank your audience, and I just really look forward to hearing from people about their reactions to this.
wonderful.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mark.
Good. Bye-bye.
Bye.